Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, February 4th, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, City Council Speaker of New York City, Corey Johnson. On Amazon, NYC, and his potential run for mayor. Also on the program, Americans want us to soak the rich. Meanwhile, Virginia Governor Ralph Northam contemplates resigning after a difficult weekend.
He did the moonwalk badly.
Virginia Lieutenant Governor puts out a statement denying claims of his assaulting a woman. Donald Trump doesn't do much besides watch TV, according to his schedule.
Sounds good to me.
Executive time.
10 EU nations recognize Guaido in Venezuela. And U.S. claims it can't return all the kidnapped kids to their parents. Meanwhile, sleep safe, however, 4,000 troops head to the southern border. It's the Odd Couple, folks. Chuck Schumer and Bernie Sanders seek to limit stock buybacks.
Thank you, Bill Ozonic.
SCOTUS stops the Roe v. Wade destroying trap law temporarily. Social Security expansion hearings being organized presently, and the whistleblower who revealed that Jared Kushner did not deserve security clearances put on suspension. All this and more on today's Majority Report, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you had a good weekend. Saw some folks out there today over the weekend at Michael Brooks's show that happened on Friday night. Sparsely attended, but it was good. And no, it was just nice. It was nice to be in that room because the last time I was in there, it was so crowded. And this time it was just nice. You felt like you could move around. It was just like plenty of room and this and that. So that was really great. It was well done. Smart of you to do it that way.
Yeah, no, I wanted
a lot
to
of
keep
people
it.
complained.
I was like, I don't want to sell more than 15 tickets.
Right. A lot of people complained during the Majority Report show, like, oh, it's so crowded. It's so packed.
Yeah.
Are we close to the fire limit?
Right.
You were just like, I'm not having any of that. This is going to be
I want everybody to
completely
be
exclusive.
spacious.
So that was really enjoyable. A good time was had by all. And, of course, we had some Majority Report fans in studio on Friday. That was also very exciting. And then over the weekend, I got introduced to a professor of marketing who develops like how what sugary foods you eat make you buy stuff or something like that. And that was exciting on Twitter.
Yep.
This
is a very frustrated marketing professor.
It was.
I'll talk about it more on TMBS, but I thank you everybody who came out. That was a great show, and from Australia to Florida to Denver to Indiana, it was amazing, and we had a great time. And when we put it up because we taped the whole thing. We'll put it up first for TMBS patrons. Obviously, there was a very funny interaction with Sam.
There we go. Well, that's I've seen people have cut. What do you
People
call
are
it?
cutting different clips.
Cut
of it, which you can-
bootleg versions.
Yes,
of that.
you can find those if you have the ingenuity to find those. That's my approach to all bootlegs. If you have the ability to find it, go find it.
We support all sort
Indeed.
of piracy.
Folks. Protect your loved ones with the peace of mind of life insurance. I've mentioned this before when I didn't even contemplate life insurance until shortly after I was married. My then wife was pregnant with our first child, and I had to start thinking about getting life insurance. Many of you think you can't afford it. Maybe you think it's too complicated. Well, chances are SelectQuote can help you get it for less than $1 a day. SelectQuote comparison shops up to 10 highly rated companies, including Prudential, Banner Life, Mutual of Omaha, others, to find you company with the best rates. SelectQuote could find a 35-year-old man a $500,000 policy for under $19 a month. That's less than $1 a day. Cup of coffee a day costs more than that. SelectQuote's breakthrough technology allows them to quickly match you with the best insurance company to find your best policy. Plus, quotes are free. Look, again, if you have children in particular, life insurance is crucial. God forbid something happens to you. And look, and here's the other key. Get it while you're young. It's cheaper. It's significantly cheaper. I am not a financial advisor. I can tell you what I did, term life insurance. The whole life insurance thing, I was told, like, you do better off just doing a term life. So it's theoretically possible. Now, I know a lot of people feel this way about, other types of insurance too, social insurance, but it's theoretically possible. You'll pay for 20 years, 30 years. I did 30 years on my first kid, 20 on the second, because I still had that first policy. And you won't die. And then nobody gets a payoff. But that's the whole point of insurance. This is to cover you in the worst case scenario. Let SelectQuote save you time and money. Get your free quote at selectquote.com/majority today. That's selectquote.com/majority for your free quote. Don't put off protecting your family another day. Selectquote.com/majority. Get full details on the example policy at selectquote.com/commercials. Your premium could vary depending on your health, issuing company, and other factors. Not available in all states. Folks, you know what's not smart? Job boards that send you candidates that aren't qualified for the role you posted. That's not smart. And the ones that send you a mile-high stack of resumes to sort through? Not good. But you know what is smart? Going to ZipRecruiter.com/majority. That's the place to hire the right person for you. Unlike other job sites, ZipRecruiter finds qualified candidates for you. Its powerful matching technology scans through thousands of resumes to identify people with the right skills. Then it actively invites them to apply for your job so you get qualified candidates first and fast. That's why ZipRecruiter rated #1 by employers in the U.S. Brendan, how did you find us? I know you went on ZipRecruiter. Were you actually on ZipRecruiter, or were you on somewhere else and it pulled you in?
I think I was on ZipRecruiter.
Really?
Yeah,
You were on ZipRecruiter. Yeah. All right. Well, either way, I was quite happy with it. I mean,
yeah, real talk. Brendan
iffy,
Brendan is definitely, I would say, the nicest and most well-adjusted person here, and I include myself in that ranking.
By far, not even close. And right now, my listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free at this exclusive web address, ZipRecruiter.com/majority. If you love this show, show your support to it and ZipRecruiter by going to ZipRecruiter.com/majority. That's how we got Brendan, folks. ZipRecruiter.com/majority. I was super, super impressed with it. ZipRecruiter, it is the smartest way to hire. All right, let's take a look at this.
Sam was like,
over the weekend.
Will you do news packets, Brendan?
Listen, over the weekend, I'm not sure if you're aware, the greatest dynasty in professional sports, one which will seal that greatness by not going to visit Donald Trump, despite the fact that there may be some personal relationships, but it doesn't matter. What's important is their political actions and their public actions. And despite a couple of missteps, what's also important is you have good advisors. So maybe you are not so savvy about what's going on in the world, and maybe you buy a wrong hat and put it in your locker. Mistakes can be made. The important thing is that you listen to your smarter advisors. In this case, Tom Brady's wife, Giselle, basically said, don't do this. Don't be an idiot. And he said, yes, dear. Okay. And he was smart.
I'm going to go kiss my kid on the lips.
Well, that's fine, too. That's fine.
I love Tom, but
but that's said like a guy who's not a parent. That's all I can tell you.
Yep.
Meanwhile,
like a guy that will never
loving
kiss
parent,
his child on the lips.
Greatest quarterback in the history of the game, maybe one of the most accomplished athletes in any sport and any time. I'm sorry, I know that bums a lot of people out, but it's true. Meanwhile, the Super Bowl took place this weekend, and here's Donald Trump talking about how he's really upset about black people.
Talking about the kneeling position you've taken and the controversy around it, do you think that the players who did kneel had a point? I mean, are you sensitive at all to players like Colin Kaepernick who point out that the majority of victims of police violence are black?
Well, you know, I'm the one that had passed judicial reform. And if you look at what I did, criminal judicial reform and what I've done, President Obama tried, they all tried, everybody wanted to do it, and I got it done. And I've been, really a lot of people in the NFL have been calling and thanking me for it.
Really?
They have been calling and thanking. You know that people have been trying to get that taken care of, and it's now signed into law and affects tremendous numbers of people and very good people. I think that when you want to protest, I think that's great, but I don't think you do it at the sake of our flag, at the sake of our national anthem. Absolutely.
But you are, do I understand you saying there, though, that you still are sensitive, though? I mean, you understand the motivation for the protest, though you don't like the form of it.
A lot of it is having to do with reform, from what I understand, whether it's criminal justice or whatever it may be. And they have different versions, and everybody seemed to have a different version of it. But a lot of it had to do with that, and I took care of that. I think that people have to, at all times, respect our flag and at all times respect our national anthem and our country. And I think there are plenty of places and times you can protest, and you can do a lot, but you can't do that. That's
bad.
I took care of it.
So the bill that passed, the criminal justice reform bill, affects maybe several thousand of the 180 or 90,000 who are in federal custody in a federal prison. That has nothing to do, well, maybe it's like a fourth order thing to do with what Colin Kaepernick was protesting. What Colin Kaepernick was protesting was the complete disregard for black lives, particularly in the context of the way that black people are policed in this country. And to the extent that the Trump administration did anything on that front, it was to have his attorney general at the time, Jeff Sessions, tell every police force in the country, not only are we going to pull back on any oversight that we're providing problematic police departments currently, we're not going to engage in that in the future. So in other words, if you have discriminatory practices, if you have a problem on your force with overt or covert racism or de facto racism or whatever it is, if you have a record of being particularly violent with black people, don't worry about it. We're not coming from you. You go to town. You do you, is what Jeff Sessions told them. So the idea that in any way Donald Trump addressed this is a farce. That's the first point. Maybe he's deluded about that. Maybe he's not. I don't think he cares one way or another. And then the idea that the standing up during the singing of the national anthem at a football game is the sine qua non. That's the one thing that you can't not do.
You can do a lot.
You could do a lot, apparently, according to Donald Trump. But that's the one thing you can't do, particularly if you're a black guy, right? I mean, because we all know that was his attempt to run in the midterm elections. Let's make it cultural. I think they're going to shift and go back to abortion, but we'll see. All right. Look, we got to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to City Council of New York Speaker Corey Johnson. Right back after this. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program New York City Council Speaker Corey Johnson. Speaker, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
I should also say you are, if I'm not mistaken, the acting public advocate as well. Is that right?
That's right. I'm a public advocate until we have the special election here in New York City later this month on February 26th, and I assumed the role on January 1st, and I'm happy to hand it over to whoever wins later this month.
I would imagine that's you've got plenty on your plate. Well, let's start with this. Now, we've played a couple of clips of you over the past. We played one on Friday, but we played over the past couple of weeks. Specifically, you in conversations, or I should say maybe in hearings, frankly, with executives at Amazon. Let's just start with this. Tell us what the Amazon deal is as it is now, and then we can talk about why you find that problematic in some ways.
Well, you guys have covered it, but with great fanfare. In November, the Governor Cuomo, and the Mayor de Blasio, made a joint celebratory announcement saying that Amazon was coming to New York City, to Long Island City in Queens on the waterfront on the East River. And what they outlined in that announcement, and what we have learned since, is that Amazon is coming here, but Amazon's not coming here just on their own like other big companies have. They're coming here and they're getting $3 billion in a combination of tax incentives and direct cash subsidies. They're getting public land. They're avoiding our city charter, our city constitution's mandated land use process, where there would be a hearing where they would have to go through and negotiate and answer questions. And they did this all in a Hunger Games-like contest, pitting over 200 cities and counties against one another. And what we've learned at these hearings is that Amazon actually got some what you could consider better offers from other cities and states and counties across the country with more money and probably more crony capitalism and corporate welfare. But they came here, they said, mostly because of our workforce, our talent pool. And so it's my sense that we gave away the store. We gave away too much. We're giving away almost $3 billion and public land and not having a public process and scrutiny for a company that's worth nearly $1 trillion to the richest man in the world, Jeff Bezos. And the rotten cherry on top of all of this is he was able to secretly negotiate a helipad on top of his new HQ2 headquarters that they'll be able to land right on top of it instead of using our subway system that is crumbling. And the ultimate question is this an appropriate use of taxpayer dollars? Is there a better way to spend $3 billion, whether it be on our subway system or on our public schools or on preventing homelessness or public housing, which is crumbling in New York City right now? And my sense is yes, and I think that we got played. I think the taxpayers got played, and I think Amazon is exhibiting a form of vulture monopolistic capitalism. And the two hearings that we've had, they have been unable to adequately answer our questions using stale talking points over and over again. So we had one hearing in December, we had another hearing this past Wednesday, we're having another hearing next month, and then we're going to have a public hearing for the public to testify as well, because this deal deserves scrutiny that it hasn't received since Amazon got New York City government employees to sign non-disclosure agreements where they avoided any sense of scrutiny throughout the entire process until the deal was announced.
Wow. All right. So I didn't realize about these NDAs, and I want to get to the status of the deal exactly. I mean, is but before we do, what makes the relationship between Amazon and the city different than, because I have folks who have said to me, well, look, these subsidies are available to any company that comes in. It's just usually not one maybe this size or with this baggage. Is that the case? Could I have a small business or any size business and go to that area in Queens and say like, oh, and I'm going to get these tax benefits for if I start a company there?
Well, it is true that a bunch of these subsidies, there are two subsidies. One is called REAP and the other is called ICAP. They're state subsidies that were created that the city participates in, and these are considered as-of-right subsidies. They're subsidies that you can achieve if you locate your business in certain geographic areas in New York City. The issue here, though, is that the only reason why they're able to get these subsidies in many ways is because they're locating in a place in Queens, and they're taking city and state land. So, we're handing over public land to them so they can actually be in a geographic area where they could qualify for these subsidies. But some of the cash that they're getting is not part of this. They're getting almost $500 million in direct cash from New York State to be able to actually construct their building. And that is not as part of these subsidies programs. That was sort of a one-time deal that was structured for them on top of the subsidy programs they're getting. And I think the larger conversation that needs to be had here, both in New York City, New York State, across the country, is, are these subsidy programs worthwhile? Do they have a good return to the taxpayer? And should these type of subsidy programs be allowed? And I think that's a much bigger conversation that this Amazon deal has really highlighted.
So even if you start with the premise that these subsidy plans are a net positive, which again, I share your skepticism about this. I've seen ads on television for years where Governor Cuomo's bragging like, "Come to New York State, our corporations pay zero in taxes." Wow, that's great if you're one of those corporations. But so in this instance, were they sold or they were given state land? I mean, that to me, I would think that land is pretty valuable stuff in Queens.
It gets even worse. I mean, the land that they are going to be occupying is city land. The city is now, I believe, going to lease to the state to be able to transact this deal and execute it in the way that it was structured. But adjacent to the land that they're building on were two sites. One was a city-owned site just to the north of it, an adjacent parcel that had been identified to go through our rezoning process to achieve affordable housing and other necessary public benefits, whether it be open space or school seats for the community in Long Island City. And just to the south of the site, adjacent to it to the south, was a privately owned site that had been going, slated to go, both these sites, through the public approval process where the city council would be able to vote on it and negotiate what was best. These sites were going to achieve somewhere along the line of 5,000 units of housing. Almost 1,500 of those units were going to be affordable housing. And what was done, and what I think is really suspect and strange, is that both of those sites, which really have nothing to do with Amazon, they're just adjacent to the sites, both of those sites that were slated to go through public review were folded into the Amazon site. So these two sites that for years were identified, had gone through a community planning process, were about to enter our public land use review process in New York City. At the very last moment when the Amazon deal was announced, it was said now these sites are folded into what's called a general project plan, which avoids the land use process in New York City. So you have a private site on the south where now the owner of that site doesn't have to go through the public review. You have a public site on the north, which was slated to go through the public review, which got folded into it. And so, again, it's a very strange thing here where it's not even just about the Amazon site, it's about the sites surrounding it, which had been identified for and were slated to go through some level of public review to get a park, to get affordable housing, to get school seats. Now the community and the city council and members of municipal government are cut out of that process, and it gets folded in with Amazon, where we can't even calculate how much money they're going to save avoiding that type of public review. And the housing that was slated for the site is no longer slated for the site in some of those sites.
I mean, so this is almost, I mean, it's a microcosm of what people find problematic with a company like Amazon. You know, it's almost like a metaphor, right? I mean, because we have these set of rules that are supposed to create processes that are supposed to be make these the use of this land as democratic as possible, so that there's as many stakeholders involved in these conversations. And the richest company in the world, or pretty close anyways, one of the richest men in the world, come in, and the whole thing is waived to provide them with their headquarters. So is this a done deal? I mean, is it just basically two guys, the mayor and the governor, get together, sit down with Bezos and say, we made a deal and that's it? Is there any way theoretically to stop or to change this deal?
Well, at this point, we have tried to use our bully pulpit as the municipal legislature here in New York City to try to shine some light on a deal where there was no light, where there was no public review, no public process in a meaningful way. It was cloaked in secrecy and in darkness, negotiated with non-disclosure agreements, even though billions of dollars in public money was being put on the line. The question of whether or not this is a done deal, Amazon's tone changed a bit at the hearing we had last week. They started to hint, well, if you don't want us, we want to come to a place where people actually want us, which I don't really buy. I think that's sort of a scare tactic to try to raise doubt in the minds of, are we going to lose potentially tens of thousands of jobs? We don't want to lose jobs, but we also don't want to lower labor standards. Amazon has one of the most anti-union records in the United States and across the world. There have been strikes and protests across Europe. There's a distribution center on Staten Island where employees have been lodging complaints against unfair labor practices. And we wanted to be able to ask those difficult questions about their collaboration with ICE on facial recognition software and their track record in Seattle and how they were able to lobby and water down legislation and regulations that they didn't like as one of the biggest employers. There is an obscure board in New York State called the Public Authorities Control Board. And for New Yorkers who may have memory of about 15 years ago, when Mayor Bloomberg proposed to build an Olympic stadium for the Jets on the west side of Manhattan, that proposal was met with a lot of opposition and had to go through this obscure authority called the Public Authorities Control Board. That board is made up of three appointees, one by the governor, one by the Speaker of the State Assembly, and one by the Majority Leader of the State Senate. It requires a unanimous vote. If one vote votes no, then it kills the deal. The governor is contending contending that it does not need to go through that board. Other experts on this are contending that it does need to go through that board. And so there is some disagreement there. I believe it needs to go through that board, which means that there's significant leverage. And I think Amazon is feeling the heat given the tough questions that have been asked of them, and I think the public outcry related to this deal.
Okay, and so I mean, it's I remember the idea of the stadium. That would have been a disaster. I mean, it's almost impossible to imagine that now, particularly with housing prices as they are in New York City, and congestion and whatnot. So, and all right, so let's just turn to a little bit in terms of like what else we could spend that money on. Today, it was announced that HUD was not taking over NYCHA, which is the New York City Housing Authority, but it was going to basically put it under some type of stewardship or monitoring, I guess. What can you tell us about that situation?
Well, I mean, NYCHA, the New York City Public Housing Authority, almost 400,000 New York City residents live in public housing, and it has seen years, if not decades, of disinvestment from the federal government, which has been hugely problematic. There was supposed to be a consent decree and settlement with a district court judge, Judge Pauley, here in New York City, New York State, and he didn't sign it because he didn't think the settlement was good enough. But the real question is, how much money does public housing need? And the estimate of what public housing needs in New York City to be able to get it in a safe and habitable place without lead and without vermin and without broken elevators and without all the issues that plague NYCHA on a day-to-day basis is $32 billion. We need $32 billion to fix NYCHA. We need $60 billion to fix the subway and bus system in New York City. We're short billions of dollars in school aid in New York City, where if you are a student who lives in a low-income zip code, predominantly in neighborhoods that are communities of color, you're not getting an adequate education because you're not getting the resources, and New York City's owed billions of dollars from a suit from over a decade ago. So that adds up to be, almost $100 billion. I think there's a better way to spend $3 billion in taxpayer money for children, for strap hangers, for public housing residents, rather than give it to a $1 trillion company with a man who's worth almost $160 billion. We got played. We were played by Jeff Bezos. We were played by Amazon. They created the Hunger Games, pitted city after city against each other, and they're running away with our money, which they don't need. They have a terrible labor track record. They collaborate with ICE in a secretive way on a regular basis. They've watered down progressive legislation in the city of Seattle. If they wanted to come here without any level of subsidy, without using public land, and create jobs, fine, they can do that. But they're coming here and they're taking our money, they're taking our land, they're lowering our labor standards. There is a better way to do this, and it is incumbent upon us to expose their track record and to talk about how this is not the right deal for New York City.
What is the argument from those people who are pushing this deal, from the governor and the mayor and from others who are pushing this deal? What are the sort of the metrics of their argument? This $3 billion investment is going to lead to, I know they say 25,000 jobs. I will also say Foxconn said that Wisconsin was going to get 13, right? I mean, I think it's gone from like 30 to 13 to maybe 1,000 at this point. But even presuming that there's 25,000 jobs that Amazon brings into the city, which is, I would imagine 13,000 or 30 to Wisconsin, far more relevant in many respects than 25,000 to New York State and certainly New York City, or vice versa. I mean, but even under those, like, what is the metrics here? What's supposed to happen now that we get Amazon broadly that's going to benefit the city?
Well, we want 25,000 jobs. You know, you
Of
want
course.
more jobs for an economy. There's nothing wrong with that. But let's provide a little bit of context. Since the Great Recession in 2008 and 2009, where the national economy and the New York City economy took a major hit, we have seen the longest economic expansion in New York City that's basically been recorded since the Great Depression almost a century ago. Over 700,000 private sector jobs have been created in the last 10 years. So when you take 25,000 jobs and you put it in that context, it's a nice number, but it's not a gigantic number. It's a gigantic number if you go to Pittsburgh or Cleveland or Scranton or somewhere in upstate New York, but it's not the same number here. That doesn't mean we don't want the jobs. It's just important to provide the context. The number that Amazon keeps citing, that New York City and New York State keep citing, is they're saying that there was a study done. Mind you, I had to say this at the hearing. The study was paid for, jointly paid for by New York City and New York State, which says that $3 billion will have a 9-to-1 return on the investment, and they believe that over the course of 20 years, it will create $27 billion in new revenue. But what they're not able to answer is if those are the potential benefits, and I'm not sure I agree with those numbers or find those numbers to be accurate, but even if they are, what they don't account for are the costs. Those are the benefits. What are the costs? What does it mean in additional sanitation? What does it mean in additional school seats? What does it mean on the wear and tear on the subways and public transportation system? The study they're citing did not look at any cost associated with it. It only looked at potential benefits. And so they keep drumming on the numbers of $27 billion. We're going to get $27 billion and 25,000 jobs. Independent analysis disagree with that number. And again, if this was done in a public way, we could have had that conversation, talk to economists who could do this type of analysis, but that wasn't done. They're holding their hat on 25,000 good-paying jobs, which we want, but not able to really defend the $3 billion in an independent way.
Right. So there's been a total failure of process. So best case scenario, we get a 9-to-1 return, but that is premised. That doesn't take into account any of the liabilities, or I would imagine also it doesn't take into account the opportunity costs of that land and what else could be there in terms of New Yorkers, but also the direct cost to the city in terms of infrastructure and I would imagine also to the loss of affordable housing that's going to be involved with this, right? And so this is really, in many respects, a process argument.
And it doesn't take into account what you mentioned earlier, Sam. It doesn't take into account what are the secondary displacement concerns, what are the housing cost concerns in the adjacent neighborhoods, what are the gentrification concerns, what are the mass transit concerns. It doesn't take into those kind of larger questions that you want to look at for surrounding neighborhoods and communities that have already seen a level of gentrification and displacement that is affecting those neighborhoods. And again, I mentioned it earlier, but it's really important to say I'm really proud that New York City is one of the highest unionized cities in the United States of America. And that's a really good thing because it creates good middle-class jobs with pensions and good benefits for people to be able to support themselves and their families. It's a pathway to the middle class and for economic security. Amazon's track record is one that is hugely anti-labor. And when I asked them last Wednesday, would they agree to labor neutrality, just sitting on the sidelines and letting their workers organize if they wanted to, they said no. Almost a decade ago, there's a casino called Aqueduct in eastern Queens that involved public land. And New York State was able to negotiate with an international casino operator, Genting. They were able to negotiate labor neutrality, where once the casino opened up and expanded, the operator would not get in the way of their workers unionizing. Amazon, at the hearing on Wednesday, when I said, would you agree to labor neutrality, the very short answer was no, sir.
All right, so let me ask you this, and you tell me if I'm out of bounds here, because I know this is sort of like outside the portfolio of the city. But on this question, specifically the unions, but on other questions too, there's another problem with Amazon, right? I mean, this is not like just a generic company coming in and looking for this deal. Amazon outside of New York, right, has incredible monopolistic power, both in the marketplace and in terms of money. It has a tremendous influence on the politics of our country, both because it's such a massive company and has so much money. Also, they have, Jeff Bezos, the owner, obviously owns the Washington Post. How much of that, I mean, I understand, like, look, your job is to deal with the facts for New York City, but how much of that is a concern to you? Because it's not just that they're not being neutral in the context of the unionization in their city. There is value to them to fight unions in New York, and the payoff is much larger than it is for a company who's just in New York, right? I mean, you have companies who don't want unions in their company. They're a New York company. They don't want a union in their company. So the way that they fight is going to be commensurate with what they think they're going to have to pay for unions in New York State. But for Amazon, the stakes are much, much larger to fight a union in New York because it implicates their company, internationally. And so what they'll bring to bear against a union in New York is much, much larger than a company whose stakes were just in New York. And that's also going to be true in terms of their influence on politics and on media. How much of that is it appropriate for you to consider being just your portfolio being about New York?
Well, I mean, when we look at the labor standards that have been created here in New York City, whether it's the city council a few years ago passing paid sick leave for New Yorkers, or all we do to ensure that we're a labor-friendly town, when you have one of the largest companies in the world, the highest valued company in the world, $1 trillion, and they have a really bad, extensive anti-labor track record, not just around the country and around the world, but documented here in New York City on Staten Island at a distribution center that opened up not that long ago, where there are complaints coming out every single month on how they treat their workers, forcing overtime, not allowing mandatory breaks, working in bad conditions. It's important. And I think there is an antitrust element to this, an antitrust element related to Amazon, but we've seen the conversation grow on antitrust related to Facebook, antitrust related to Google, antitrust related to these companies that a decade ago were celebrated as sort of the new economy. And we need to ensure that when you have these large companies, whether it be Airbnb or Uber or these large tech giants, we don't want them to erode labor standards that protect employees. So it's a conversation that has to be had. It's a conversation that hopefully now with the Democrats in charge of the House, we can have at the federal level through oversight hearings, through antitrust hearings, and it's a conversation we need to look at across the country. Income inequality is still the biggest issue in the United States of America, and the corporatization of our politics have showed that corporations and the CEOs and boards who run these organizations have far too much power, a disproportionate amount of power as it relates to the average citizen. And what are the effects of that? How does that affect everyone else? How does that affect how we spend government money? How does it affect public policy? And is it right for the future of our society? That's a much bigger question than just one side in Long Island City, but this is sort of emblematic of how they get to, as someone likes to say, rig the system, and how we need to be able to look out for the average New Yorker and the average American.
City Council Speaker Corey Johnson, just one last question. What's the story? Are you going to run for mayor? I've seen some. You've alluded to it on Twitter.
Well, I was not trying to play cute, but I hadn't done any fundraising. I've been in this position for a year, and everyone else who's definitely running has millions of dollars in the bank. So I wanted to be forthcoming about my fundraising strategy, which is, even though I could accept contributions of $2,000, I've self-imposed a limit on myself of $250 per person. I'm not taking any money from real estate developers, no money from lobbyists, and no money from corporate PACs. And to be able to do that effectively, I need more than 7,000 New Yorkers to be able to contribute $250. And as I started to fundraise, I knew that if I started to do this privately, it would get out to the press. So I was being transparent about it. I haven't made a final decision. I love New York City. 36 years old. I came here at 19 years old with 2 bags, knowing one person. It's a city of dreams and aspirations, and I'm going to keep looking at it, try to build support, and we'll see what happens. 2.5 years is, 40 lifetimes in politics.
Right.
But I'm grateful to be able to continue to do this work.
All right. Well, if people wanted to get more information, where should they head? Is there a site that
Corey for NYC, COREYFOR NYC.com.
Speaker of the City Council of New York, Corey Johnson. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sam. Take care. Bye-bye.
That's impressive, incidentally, in terms of the restrictions he's put on his fundraising. First off, you never hear of candidates who don't take real estate money in New York City. The only other candidate I'm aware of right now that is doing that is Nomiki Konst. And which reminds me, I should tell you right now, she needs your support. She's got 9 days, not even 9 days at this point, to, I think, 7 days to raise, I think, another $9,000. My numbers may be off by 1,000 or so. $9,000 from New York City residents. You can go up to $250, and up to $250, those dollars are matched by the city 8-1. We have a very good publicly financed campaign system here. And that's why he said he can do up 7,000 some odd donations to that amount, because there's a limit on how much you can raise, or at least in terms of being matched. And it's 7,000 times 250. I can't do that math off the top of my head, but
of course not. We're opposed to math.
Significant amount of money. But if you have the opportunity, we're going to put a link to Nomi Konst, and we will also put one to Corey Johnson's site. But if you have the opportunity to give anything to Nomi, she will qualify for the matching funds. And even if it's $5 or $10, $20, that'll be times 8 if she qualifies. So it's coming down to the line right now. She got the signatures. Her signatures were okay. She's going to be she's going to get into the debate. So if you have the opportunity, like I say, $5, $10 times 8, that's significant cash when you're running in a special election in New York City. That election is going to happen in 3 weeks or something, I think it is. So so check that out.
Get her in that office, guys.
The interesting thing too,
New York public advocate.
Yes, she would be great. Honestly, so outside the system, and really, that job, the public advocate job, is a strange job. It's one of those jobs that, and I think this is true of some jobs in politics, but not to the extent that it is in this job. This job is highly undefined. It has often been a stepping stone for people. I don't think that she has. I don't know if she has the ambitions, but she certainly burned a lot of bridges, and she seems very comfortable with that, I should say. And that, I think, is a great top line for your resume for that job. She's also worked in the media, and her ideas about providing research that are going to allow for more journalism around the city is key. So I think she's an extraordinary candidate for that position. And I'm going to be watching the Corey Johnson. Because I think I'm
quite interested in a Corey Johnson bid. I'm pretty well convinced.
The just awareness of the dynamics here, and I think the stuff with Amazon is just not so straightforward as we were sold early on. There was a lot of skepticism early on, but I think he really clearly understands the dynamic here. And Amazon wants to be here. And if they want to be here that much, there is no reason to there is no reason to have to pay them money that should be going other places to come. This is going to make me laugh. I see what's being queued up here. I have not seen this before, and this is going to make me laugh because I already have someone. I have someone who already sort of says, "I wonder who made this."
Accuses you of having a crush on
NYC? Yes. Folks, just a reminder: this program
is just so warm and thoughtful.
This program relies on your support. By becoming a member, you make this show possible day in, day out. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, we give you extra content every day. We give you commercial-free content every day. Although I'm not sure what's going to happen on Wednesday because I may have to have a personal day because, modern life, ladies and gentlemen. So your support keeps the show going. We want to thank our members, obviously, so much. We literally could not do it without you. And it is, with all the sort of the mishigas that we get involved in the YouTube world, the nice thing about having a listener-supported show is that you don't have to tiptoe around certain things, and so that's good. We're not going to be getting big funding from any other organizations. That's just not going to happen. But members make it possible for us to feel good about that. So thank you. JustCoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Michael, TMBS, special time because of Tuesday. And a reminder, tomorrow night, State of the Union address. We're going to be doing live coverage. Not sure what time it's going to start. We will tell you tomorrow. But it starts at 9? Is that right?
9 starts at 9.
All right, so we probably won't start until, probably 8:30 or so.
So, yeah, the idiot is doing his address tomorrow night. So we're having a TMBS on Thursday evening before returning to our normal time of Tuesday next week. Brianna Joy Gray is joining us in studio on Thursday. We also have an activist, an Israeli activist who works on one-state solution politics as well. And then on Tuesday of next week, Mark Blythe, who has been a regular guest for patrons, is going to be our main show guest. And check out the primer we just released for patrons with Nigerian British writer Ralph Leonard on CLR James and the critique of identity politics. Patreon.com/TMBS. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks to everybody who's at the live show.
Jamie?
Yeah, so this past weekend we did something a little different on the Intifada, and we invited some of... Yes. Indeed. We invited some of our amazing Left is Best community members who were in town to come and make a participatory episode with us.
Nice.
We
How many people?
We got a lot of good folks in here. We got Jeff from Georgia.
There was a seat. There was a sign on my. There was a note on my seat from Train Boy.
Yeah, we had Train Boy. He did some very on-brand train talk. We had Teacher Lauren, Theo, so many good folks. And
Teacher Lauren was here?
Yeah.
I met her husband at the show, and he is a carpenter. Gave me
really?
Tip. He gave me
you didn't
carpenter
meet Teacher
tip.
Lauren at the show?
Well, I did.
Okay.
But I
you were excited to meet her husband because he's a carpenter.
He
told me. He said, "What's the deal with Sam bothering me about carpentry?"
I got a big tip, which I used in making a shelf this weekend, actually, which was a lot of glue.
Can we talk about AOC and carpentry together?
A lot of glue. Yeah,
it's a good tip.
Yeah, don't hesitate on the glue.
AOC
but yeah, it was super amazing, and I think it's going to come out pretty good. We also have our episode that is still up from last week where we talk about The Handmaid's, Fail, and The Purge movies with Leslie Lee III from Struggle Session. So check it out.
All right. And Matt?
Literary Hangover, still on the Seven Gables episode. Edgar Allan Poe coming soon, though.
Sweet.
All right.
This is a Bullprog, or I think
Bullprog,
goes by MS
Bullprog.
Tart, I think, too, on SoundCloud.
So.
All right.
Bullprog's a heavy hitter.
We will head into the fun half. 646-257-3920 is the number, and we will see you there.
She said that 200 million would be 40% of the population, and that's wrong.
Right, that's 60%.
I mean, that's closer.
Tell me what it is.
Let me do some quick math. It is 61%.
Wow. He's the ultimate math nerd.
I'm sorry. When I said it was 60%, I clearly lied to you. When we all know, after having done it on our calculators, it's 61%. Let's talk about AOC a little bit more.
Oh, hell yeah.
Oh my God. This pure descent of the divine goddess.
Oh my God.
Right? Folks, please sit down, because it turns out that at one point in her past, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez danced.
Budgets are moral documents. We only have empty pockets when it comes to the morally right things to do. Healthcare is right. Our climate is in a crisis right now. It is time to move over to a renewable energy economy. It will hire a ton of people. Wow. Every single American should have the opportunity to attend college or trade school. One of the biggest threats facing America is income inequality.
Exactly.
We see that this is not a pipe dream. Every other developed nation in the world does this.
I certainly hope she's not the future.
New party? Who dis?
Left is best. 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 Left is best.
It's really not about left versus right as it is top versus bottom.
Left is best.
And the only way that life is going to get better for us as working class Americans is by electing people who don't take corporate PAC money.
I love it. Oh my God. Wow, that was pretty funny.
Man.
Adorable.
Bullfrog is a heavy hitter.
That was
as
good.
I say, that is a really, really, really funny one.
Let's go to the
Dave Rubin one was great too.
Dave Rubin one was great. Where is that sound sheet here? Okay. Let's start with this. Now look, oh God, this guy. All right, so apparently there's this other podcast called Pod Save America. This, of course, is a play on God Save America.
Which is not a thing, by the way.
Well, it's not a thing. Pod Save America is not a thing, but it is a thing. It exists. And here is Pod Save America. They copied us on the type of,
everything.
Everything. The microphone. The boom.
The hat wearing.
They had big headphones, though, because they're still getting used to the idea of being on radio. I got over that a long time ago. And so here is John Lovett. Now, this is the guy who's now a comedy writer, right? Is that right? Is John Lovett isn't one of them a comedy writer?
I don't know if he's officially a comedy writer, but he fancies himself comedic. Oh, he wrote a pilot.
Okay.
He was on The Critic in SNL, right?
Everybody
I
gets
don't
a pilot.
But
all of their names are taken.
Here is and this is why back in my Bumble days, I wrote on my profile, "Let me tell you why you can do better than Pod Save America."
Oh,
and
wow. Can you imagine the appeal of that? It's like, I will lecture you over dinner about why your podcast.
Well, I just
Now
realized
you swiped left very quickly.
I just realized I'm missing a
What's
huge
up, honey baby?
branding
Your
opportunity.
podcasts are bad.
Nevertheless, here is John Lovett making an argument that I think is wrong.
There are legitimate policy arguments in favor of a Medicare access approach as opposed to a Medicare for all approach that is not ideological in the sense that it doesn't make you less liberal and it doesn't make you less progressive to view it as a positive outcome, because again, we are all going to end up paying for healthcare. The ultimate goal here is not a process one. It is not, a private healthcare plan versus a Medicare plan. If you have good insurance that you can afford, that protects you when you need it most, that gives you the option to get the preventative care that you need without bankrupt you and your family, that makes you feel safe and protected, that is the goal. As a country, our goal is to pay for everyone's healthcare in a way that doesn't eat up a greater and greater share of our gross domestic product. That is the ultimate goal. The debate about policy, the debate about process is a really, really important one, but it should not be always reduced to this ideological question as to whether or not you're going along with Bernie or if you're part of the neoliberals. It is more complicated and a more nuanced than that.
Okay, here's what I agree with. It is more nuanced than he's making it. He's actually reducing it far too, in generalizing it far too much. I keep it back up there because I want to replay the first part of it. Look, I agree with the sentiment that it is silly to put labels on this, and that these questions, I don't know what it means that these questions, if he's saying they aren't ideological differences or if they shouldn't be. But the reality is there's a word here he uses that does a tremendous amount of work, more work than it can do in reality. And that word is if. All right, let's play it down.
There are legitimate policy arguments in favor of a Medicare access approach as opposed to a Medicare for all approach that is not ideological in the sense that it doesn't make you less liberal and it doesn't make you less progressive to view it as a positive outcome, because again, we are all going to end up paying for healthcare. The ultimate goal here is not a process one. It is not, a private healthcare plan versus a Medicare plan. If you have good insurance that you can afford, that protects you when you need it most, that gives you the option to get the preventative care that you need without bankrupt you and your family, that makes you feel safe and protected, that is the goal. As a country, our goal is to pay for everyone's healthcare in a way that doesn't eat up a greater and greater share of our gross domestic product. That is the ultimate goal.
Right. First off, it is clear that we cannot achieve that goal that he's talking about, not just the GDP, but having health care that will not bankrupt you and your family. It is clear that we cannot do that with reliance on the private health insurance industry. That model does not work. I think there's a legitimate actual argument that you could have supplemental private health insurance. But if every person in the country does not have the ability to bypass the private health insurance industry, then we're not going to get there. It is just the case that the private health insurance industry does not have a functioning business model that does not involve making it very difficult to insure people properly. That's just the fact. And so you can say if, but unless that word if is magic and can actually change physics, you're not going to get there. Aside from that, we shouldn't just have health insurance that does not threaten to bankrupt us. We are past this now. The American public compromised for decades. That we're willing to have the aspiration for insurance that won't bankrupt us. We're okay with insurance that won't bankrupt us or that will actually cover us, right? That's what the ACA was. That was supposedly the deal we were making, but it didn't work on the bankrupt side. It cut down on bankruptcies, no doubt, but it also puts such economic pressure, and it ties us into employers. It doesn't free us up. We want freedom from this, and the government, in a Medicare for all, like I say, the existence of private insurance as a supplement, that doesn't implicate this. But Medicare for all, where the government insures all of us, insures and assures us, you will get health insurance. You will be able to pay for this. The vast majority of doctors will have to take it because they will have no business otherwise. There will be no point in them being doctors. They won't see any patients otherwise. And incidentally, you won't have to go through some type of maze to get refunded or to find out if your doctor covers you. All this stuff.
Deal with
We're
less
done.
bureaucracy.
The American people is done. We made that compromise and it didn't work. It wasn't enough that we just don't get bankrupt. We want it not to be our second or third job to get health insurance and to worry if we're covered, or to deal with like, oh, it's the opt-in, the open enrollment this year, this month, or do I qualify, or what if I got to stay at this job, or I'm going to lose my health insurance. We're done with that. The American public is done with that. And to that extent, it is an ideological battle. I mean, I think it gets a little bit too reduced in some ways. I think people overuse the word neoliberal, but nevertheless, it is a real difference. That is not process. It's no more process than like the difference between walking somewhere and taking a plane. Yes, you'll get there. You'll get there. You want to go to LA?
That's a process question.
You want to get to LA? Don't argue with me about whether you're going to take a plane or whether you're going to walk. You'll get to LA. That's what dismissing those plans as process is equivalent to. It really makes a material difference whether you fly to LA from New York or walk to LA from New York. When you fly, you get there quicker. When you walk, you get there much later, and it's going to be exhausting. You'll probably have blisters. Maybe unless you brought food along the way, you might be hungry or cold or exposed to the weather. Where are you going to sleep during that time?
You'll have a greater appreciation of the lay of the land, though.
This is
Get
not
to know
just,
this country.
This is not just a process question. And beyond that, even if you want to go beyond that, okay, there is an argument that from an ideological perspective, there are implications to simply saying that the government has a responsibility to provide health insurance. It's not that dramatic of a thing. We do it for a quarter of the third of the population right now to the American public. And to have a relationship between its citizens and the government where everyone can enjoy the benefits that Medicare recipients do is important in terms of people's understanding of their relationship to their government, which will pay other dividends. But even keeping it as narrowly situated as Levitt wants to, he's wrong.
Well, here's the thing. Like, he says that we're the ones being ideological, but all the evidence points to the fact that the best way to guarantee healthcare for everyone is a single payer system. So if you look at the evidence and you still want a market-based solution, I think you're being the ideological one. But also, like, there is an essential difference in ideology between the people who believe that healthcare is a right that should be socially provided for and free at point of service, and those who don't think that it is. And that's like not something that can really be reconciled. But that's why the pragmatic arguments, again, are so important, because like just one counterpoint to what he's saying that he doesn't seem to understand is that if rich people have private insurance and their taxes are going to pay for public insurance for poor people, rich people are going to be incentivized to want to shrink that system as much as they possibly can so that they don't have to pay for it. Whereas if everybody is on the same health system, then the people with the power have a lot of buy-in and it's a lot less vulnerable to attack.
I think that's true. Although in the context of Social Security, right, everybody pays in. Rich people don't need that social insurance when they're richer. The $2,000 a month or $2,600 a month that they get is meaningless to them. But they still can't touch Social Security. I think if everyone is involved in it, the rich that would have perhaps a supplemental private insurance, if they want a concierge, they want their doctor to show up at their house or whatever, and give them check their blood pressure at their home. Fine, all well and good. But here's the thing that is disingenuous about this: there is no argument that the mixed version he's talking about is more practical. You never hear anyone make that argument. The practicality, or I should say, is more functional. The practicality is there are forces that we cannot fight. And if we want to remove the ideology from this debate, the way to do it is to say Medicare for all. You either criticize Medicare for all, that is on its merits, or you say we simply as a country are too beholden to the financial interest of the private health insurance industry to get enough people to politically do this. Like all of that talk, you hear about it, but it's whispered, right? Well, it's time to make it explicit. If you want to advocate for this because you don't think that we as a society, even though the vast majority of people might want it, have the political will to fight the money in the private health insurance industry, then you are doing a disservice to the country to not admit that's the problem. Right. Because once that's admitted, then things are going to start getting ideological. Like, it's not ideological necessarily to say, I want a Medicare buy-in versus a Medicare for all. Particularly, it's not until you start explicitly saying, I'm okay with a system where people, the vast majority of people want one thing, but we have too many powerful moneyed interests, and be specific about it. There's too many powerful who are going to prevent us from getting that, and spell it out. And then we can move on to the next question is like, what are we going to do about that problem? What are we going to do in terms of antitrust? Or what are we going to do about expropriating the value maybe it is for some of the drugs that they get,
and
the runaway profits.
It shows where they're stuck.
So they can't spend, so that they're allowed to spend on lobbying, but they're not going to because we're going to take away the profit margin on that drug in such a way that they're going to want to just pay themselves instead of just getting lobbying.
Instead of trying to corrupt the process. And yeah, but that's also where they're just stuck because, when Obama did healthcare, I mean, you could legitimately say there just wasn't the political context and will to take on all of the fights you need to have. And that would be a legitimate historical argument. It was the wrong policy because even my understanding from reading people like Hacker, who I think is where like the overall design for that plan came from, that essentially it isn't just like the public plan is ideologically important, but the public plan is the structure that keeps the prices down essentially. So it's very difficult to implement that successfully, just even on a technocratic level without that part of the package. But they might have had a case back then that like, look, people aren't invested in the specifics. The debate back then was, it was still a mainstream position for people to say like, who aren't just Republicans, to say like, well, having 40 million people without coverage is just part of how we do things. It's totally not the case today. And if you want to say that we're still totally backed in a corner, like what you're saying, then it's like you have to make a completely different argument, and that's going to be
you got to be explicit with it.
You got to be super explicit, and I think, and same goes for all of the candidates who are going to be prevaricating on those issues, whether they're clearly like Biden or McAuliffe or Bloomberg, but also like a Harris or a Booker who've been flip-flopping,
or Elizabeth Warren. I would have respect for a candidate who says, "I want Medicare for all, but I'm putting people on notice right now that the health insurance industry is extremely powerful, and they're going to fight for it. And we may not end up with a Medicare for all, but we're going to have to fight for it, and it's going to require the American public to stand up and fight for it, and also adopt some other mechanisms in which to curb their power in this fight."
100%. And I mean, also though, I just want to say, like, I agree with you about like sort of like ancillary providers not being the biggest thing in the world. Like, if there's some type of private home care or something, I mean, I wouldn't prefer it, but I don't think that that's central to this question of like essentially eliminating insurance companies and HMOs and making it free at point of delivery. But I think, on the other hand, I'm very interested in making as much of the health system writ large in public hands as possible. So while I would say like, okay, we can negotiate on that, but I want to start seeing, like, following Elizabeth Warren, what about making the pharmaceutical industry, expropriating that and making it public, and really starting to put, more on the table? Because theoretically, that's another way of addressing the advantages they have, is actually just blistering them at as many angles as possible. That's exactly
what I'm saying.
Just like, hey, we're going for everything. Not only single payer, we're also going to make the pharma industry public. It's all built on public research. You profit off of privatized commons anyways. We're going to go after hospital chains. So when you think about the fight back, it's not going to just be single payer. It's the whole thing.
Yeah, it's going to become increasingly clear during this fight who is a good faith left liberal and who thinks it's totally fine to let a private profit take precedence over the wants and needs of the majority.
Here is Elizabeth Warren, and this is an instance where, not unlike Kamala Harris, although Kamala Harris didn't do it publicly, it sort of kind of came out the back door, where there's some wiggle room on this Medicare for all.
Is there room for private health insurance in your vision of the ideal American healthcare system?
So let's start with the battle we're having right now and talk about the things we need to be doing, because I don't want to lose sight of this.
Okay.
It's good to talk about our overall goal, and here's our overall goal. This is what distinguishes Democrats from Republicans. Democrats believe health care is a basic human right, and we fight for basic human rights. Our obligation is to make sure that everybody gets coverage at the lowest possible cost to all of us. So what does that mean? Right now, it means fighting the Republicans who are trying to sabotage the Affordable Care Act.
Right now, your vision for Medicare for all, would it all be a public option, or would it include private insurance?
So right now, there are multiple bills on the floor in the United States Senate. I've signed on to Medicare for all. I've signed on to another one that gives an option for buying into Medicaid. There are different ways we can get there, but the key has to be always keep the center of the bullseye in mind, and that is affordable health care for every American.
Yeah. So,
not a good answer.
Again, Mealy, and it's unclear to me, like, why is there already this negotiation against it?
It's the same pathology, though. This is an interview you could give a year into her presidency, when it's like it's been backdoored, people are on the streets, and this is actually what's getting hashed out, and we didn't get there 100% yet. But we achieved this, and this. Why you would say that before people even started voting is bizarre. The only thing I can imagine is
it's got to be either they're worried about fundraising, or they're getting pushback from big donors who are saying don't be so married to Medicare for all. But it seems to me that you could also even phrase that, even if you had to do this for your big donors, right? And anybody running for president on some level has to do this, it seems. At least those who have declared at this point. I don't know that it'll be interesting to see if Bernie has this type of wiggle room. I suspect he won't. We'll see.
I don't think Warren does either.
Here's the point. Well, but to the extent that she did, she expressed it, and there's no reason why it seems to me that Warren couldn't say, look, I want Medicare for all. There are a lot of powerful forces out there that don't want it or that it scares them. And it is going to be a condition upon the American public if we get there. But it just, this negotiation beforehand by saying, like, it doesn't matter between a Medicaid buy-in and Medicare for all. I'm sorry. Those are very, very different programs. And those are very different ways of structuring it. And
she's also undermining. I mean, I think like those of us who've been treating her, fairly and with proper respect, frankly, who, prefer Bernie if he jumps in. But we've been making, like Bhaskar and I have been giving her a lot of credit for her policy proposals. And Politico, on the other end, with that report on Wall Street executives, did the inverse, where the bad guys have told you who's unacceptable to them, and she's on the list.
Right.
So she should just be milking all of the political mileage of being on the bad guy list.
Well, here's where the difference in where the two people are coming from comes into play. Right? Because I think somebody asked us last week, like, or maybe it was you, Sam, like, what is the substantive difference between someone who a left liberal who fundamentally believes in regulated capitalism and some kind of democratic socialist like Bernie identifies as?
That was not the question. The question was, what is the difference in their policy proposals?
Okay. Well, here's a practical difference. And it also goes back to what Virgil was saying on Friday about how we need to suit up for war. If you put a market-based solution on the same level as a systemic solution, like, I don't know, standing up to a large sector of capital, like, even if the plan you start with, even if a plan the left liberal starts with is like very good and seems to get you there, if you give an inch to the idea that the private insurance industry should or could exist in any kind of helpful way, like, you've already lost. And that opens you up completely to rolling it back, to means testing. Like, you give these people an inch, they'll take a mile.
Well, yeah, but she wasn't advocating a market base. She was saying either buy into Medicaid or Medicare for all. I mean, neither one of those is market, right? Neither one of those is market based. One is, there are two different government programs. And buying into Medicaid, the disadvantage, I mean, I guess the disadvantages of buying into Medicaid is that we've heard that states have too much control over Medicaid, as opposed to Medicare, which is run, by the federal government and is now maybe theoretically in the buy into Medicaid, it's not under the same restrictions that it would be on the states. But she's not advocating a market one. I just think that, like, from a political standpoint, now maybe she does.
She seemed like she was leaving the door open. Maybe I misinterpreted what she was saying.
Well, she just said buy into Medicaid. She mentioned two programs, buy into Medicaid and Medicare for all.
Even when you are asking people to pay for it, that's a compromised position that nobody should be taking at this stage in the fight.
I mean, that may be the case, but she's not doing what you said she was in terms of, like, promoting a market-based solution. Now, she may be, she may and may not, that may be an incomplete clip, but in the context of that clip, and I think there is, I agree with you. I think the idea of taxing and then having, that relationship to the government is better than to buy into Medicaid. But neither one of those is a market-based thing. They're just, maybe I need to read the
She should run off the political capital that she has from that article. I really believe. Like, I think I did, just to really simplify that,
particularly
quote,
this early in the primary.
Sanders and Warren are unacceptable. It should be bold and in an ad with like a yellow marker around it. And I think, to be fair to her, what's funny about her is I think like she's both obviously genuinely willing to challenge those interests because she has her whole career and she should get the credit for that. But then I think this is where her instinct to quote unquote get stuff done is not compatible with being a good campaign.
All right, I get 30 people on the phone.
She did also sign on to the option that lets private insurance companies be deliverers of Medicare, if I recall correctly. She's hedging her bets.
I'm not sure about that one, but appreciate hold on one second. Let's go to the phones. Got 30 people on the phone. Calling from a 210 area code. Who's this?
Good afternoon, Sam. It's John from San Antonio.
John from San Antonio. How are you, sir?
I'm okay. So in the last week, the debate over Medicare for All has come to the forefront with Harris, Booker, and Warren all abandoning Bernie's version of Medicare for All, promoting Bernie's version of Medicare for All, which eliminates the private industry over a period of years. Earlier in the month, the Kaiser Family Foundation had a poll in which they stated some honest facts and some fear-mongering. The aspect that the journalists latched onto, there's only 37% of surveyed wanted to eliminate the private health care insurance companies. You know, I don't understand why people have such a high opinion of these companies. You know, they have forced the American public to pay vastly higher prices than any other industrial nation in the world. The average American pays $10,224 in 2017. The average of the 12 wealthiest nations is $5,280,000. In 2016, the U.S. spent 17.8 of its gross domestic product on health care, while the average spending among the highest income countries was 11.5 of GDP. Why are Americans paying more for health care? The largest reason is because the American electorate refuses to rein in the health insurance industry. You've interviewed former health insurance executive Wendell Potter many times. He's had a mea culpa concerning his former role and has spoken out against the industry he is involved in. On December 14th of last year, Potter wrote an op-ed that stated, "He spent 20 years in the health insurance industry executive before leaving my job as vice president of Cigna. I can tell you firsthand that focusing on a half-baked measure like a Medicare buy-in, Democrats would hand a huge gift to the private insurance industry while doing less than the bare minimum to help struggling businesses, workers, and families and patients. It's time for the Democrats to stop proposing health care reform that relies on insurance companies to pay their fair share." So after 2 decades in the for-profit healthcare industry, I can assure you that they never will. They have no interest in doing anything that might in any way jeopardize profits. Their only interest is delivering profits to their shareholders. From their perspective, the status quo is very profitable. Last Wednesday, Paul Waldman wrote in the Washington Post a piece called "The Media is Badly Botching the Medicare for All Debate." And here's some excerpts. He says it's just as bad as the Iraq War, what the media is doing, and you can absolutely talk about whatever you want about the cost of a universal system, and journalists almost never do. They're not asking questions. You have to compare what a universal system would cost compared to what you're paying now. Maintaining this status quo is a choice that will cost us $50 trillion. My opinion is actually, of course, to $45 trillion, but still over 10 years in the status quo. That's the single most important fact to keep in mind as we talk about costs, and the people have already forgotten to know about it. Just this morning, Cory Booker was on CBS morning show with Norah O'Donnell and was saying it's going to cost $20 to $30 trillion over a 10-year period. That's too much money. Here's the truth. The government already pays $20 trillion right now in taxes for health care. I mean, you take out 1.45 that everybody pays for Medicare and their employers, 1.45, all the other coverage coming from Medicaid, the VA, community health clinics. So the real number is only about $1.2 trillion per year. Right. And finding that mechanism, we should
right.
put an
We're
emphasis
talking
on
over
taxing
the course
rich.
of 10 years, we're talking closer to $12 trillion added to what we pay now. But that $12 trillion, if we were doing it over 10 years and kept it in the in terms of the private sector paying for it, as individuals paying for it, or businesses paying for it, would be closer to $15 to $17 trillion. All right. Well, listen. Here's I can answer your first question, John. Okay. Why is the American public hesitant about this? And that is for the same reason why individuals make irrational choices all the time where they're afraid to do something different. That happens all the time. Why do people stay in marriages they don't want to be in? Why do people stay at jobs they don't like? Why do people I don't know, not take their car in to get an oil change when they know they should? People are nervous about change. They don't. They sometimes are a little bit lazy and feel comfortable where they are. The unknown is scary, and frankly, I mean, the irony is that by the time people get a taste of what we're talking about, the only thing they can think about is making sure that they don't lose it. You know, that's why seniors vote, and all it takes to activate seniors in this country. You know, Barack Obama. You know, when people forget this, when Barack Obama ran, going into Iowa, the thing that I'm convinced he won, what took him over the edge in Iowa was to talk about how Social Security was in crisis, when in fact Social Security was not in crisis, but it activated older folks who are like, "This is the guy. He's telling me Social Security's in crisis. He's going to do something about it. I don't want to lose my Social Security." And you get the same response with, like, you know, keep the government off my hands off my Medicare. The American public, up until I think very recently, has been completely unaware of what Medicare for all would mean. They've been scared about it, and to the one extent that I think that there is an argument to say, you know, we're going to drop, the first thing is to drop, Medicare. We're going to pass legislation, and we're going to drop Medicare. Anybody over the age of 45 goes right into Medicare. And maybe people can buy in prior to that. That's the best argument for that in my mind is just that the American public is nervous because it's just something that is foreign to them. And that's it.
Well, I mean, one of the things that Bernie talked about a few months ago that I thought was a little bit of a concession was he's saying that this all wouldn't happen at once. In other words, you know, there would be a 10-year phase in. You know, in other words, the first one would be, you know, everybody who was born to, I think it was 26 years old. And then 55 to 65 would be the first one.
Right.
And then the next year,
right,
it would be 45. Right, which is to somewhat, you know, it's saying that we shouldn't do everything at once. Now, at the Sanders Institute at the gathering, they were talking about the Taiwan system, which came up in the late 90s, where it was phased in over a year and a half, and everything went really well.
Well, I actually think, here's the thing. I actually think there's a danger in phasing it in so slow that it can be attacked as you go and people don't get the benefits. I think that can be problematic. But all I can tell you is that the fear is simply, like, on some level, a certain amount of human nature. And I mean, think about this, like, how much consternation was there about the Affordable Care Act when, in fact, you know, less than 3% of Americans, aside from the Medicaid expansion, right? But in terms of the private insurance industry, less than 3% of Americans, if I'm doing my math correctly, we're talking about 10 million people, actually buy their insurance through Obamacare. The rest of the people, all that they ended up getting, the only implications were, and I think that the selling of Obamacare was completely botched because, I mean, when you think about this, it's sort of stunning. The only thing that impacted everybody else in terms of health insurance was they can't have their insurance taken away from them. They can't be denied for pre-existing conditions. They get free colonoscopies. They get free birth control. They can keep their kids on it until they're 26. Their health insurance has to include certain basic services, essentially, and products to constitute health insurance. That's it in terms of the implications for everybody. The problem is they overpromised. They said it was going to be cheap. And the problem is people hate their health insurance, but even still, the idea of switching to something else is scary. Appreciate the call.
I would look at the work of Daniel Ariely, actually. I don't like behavioral economics applied to policy, but he wrote this book called Predictably Irrational. And he also did some of the early research on inequality. So he was one of the people who did like basically Americans, their rhetoric on things like meritocracy and inequality is completely mismatched in what they actually choose in an experimental setting. So basically like they opt for like the most redistributive, progressive, left tax scheme imaginable, like probably bigger than what AOC is proposing or Bernie. But if you ask them, they'll say like, no, I don't want to like, punish success or whatever. But his other research is on loss aversion. And that's what you were alluding to about like staying in a bad marriage or a job you don't like or something. So I do think like that is going to have to be something that's played with. And I think that might be the totally mistaken, but that might be some of the instinct that someone like Warren has when she sort of emphasizes essentially like you'll keep your doctor line, right? Which is actually quite important. I mean, that was something that Obama really did get dinged with and not totally invalidly, frankly. I think that's because he was fiddling around with private healthcare and, creating all this convoluted new bureaucracy, which is unhelpful to
just trust those guys.
Right. Well, but I think ultimately you're going to have to contend with those concerns. I like to, Bhaskar said on Friday, you have to actually respect people's desire for normalcy.
You also have to remember that this is a billion-dollar, hugely profitable industry that has poured millions of dollars into disinformation of the populace, freaking people out, into quote-unquote centrist think tanks who want to lie to people and say, oh yeah, we can get there with the market-based solutions. It'll be fine. And also, I think what you were just talking about with the amount that these sectors of capital freaked out about even the lightest attempts to regulate the industry and to sort of move towards a better, more universal system, like they're going to treat any attempts, even the nice ones like the ACA, as like some sort of full-on socialist expropriation campaign. So given that fact, I think they've shown that they're not ever going to play nice with this. So we might as well give them the real thing. That's the only way to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I think that we still haven't addressed in that equation people's just general concern about it. Although I feel like it's changing, and
that's where politicians like Bernie and AOC come in, who can speak to people and explain it to them really well.
Part of the theory behind the public option within the exchanges always was there will be a subset of people out there who will be saying, this is great. And my friends, going home and saying, Mom, Dad, or, sis, bro, this public option thing is great. It's too bad you guys aren't eligible for it. And it's not because of, how much you made. It's just that you get insurance through your job. Sorry.
Well, that's what's already been happening with Medicare, right? Which is one of the most popular programs in the country.
Yeah. The problem is
I'm like, wow, if I can stay alive until I qualify for Medicare, I'll be set.
Right. I mean, that's what I was saying earlier is that, in some way there hasn't been enough. You just don't hear enough of
the Medicaid expansion kind of fulfilled some of that function, but it had, I think, that really weird class dynamic where you had, particularly Luke was telling me in Idaho that the one thing that he would hear from like reactionary Republican types at the door that he thought they were totally justified in, they put the blame in the wrong place, but they would be quite pissed that they were like $300 or $1,000 off from
If
getting
you're at
Medicaid.
134%,
yeah, and they're like,
of-
I
well,
am totally
Yeah.
screwed.
Yes. And that's
I'm
one
being
more
forced to
reason.
pay
That's always a
overpriced,
problem.
bad private insurance.
Means testing is
or,
bad.
And so
Like,
right, we know that.
We
right.
can afford not to means test. We can afford to make it free. The only reasons not to do those things, the only reasons not to give people really good health care that doesn't cost them anything is out of deference to these private interests.
And here is another inconvenient fact is that 70% of people are happy with their work-based insurance.
What percentage of people have had to use it in any real way?
Well, I think that is one of the difficulties of all this, is that for a long time, in particular, it was even worse before the ACA, frankly. Because a small group of people use their health insurance to the point where they can find out how bad it really is. And that's the nature of insurance, right? Like, I don't know how bad my fire insurance is. I will tell you after my house burns down and they don't rebuild it. But I'm one out of, thousands in my neighborhood who have fire insurance, and we all think it's great. But we don't know because we haven't had a fire. So that's what's problematic there. So, this is a tough nut to crack. I just think that politicians need to be more upfront about those challenges rather than make it like, well, this system could work or that system could work. Because
they need to go for what really works, and then I think incorporate the Daniel Ariely stuff and try to actually have some communication strategies.
Or also just say,
that are
like, here are the
enough.
challenges,
Yeah.
and here are the challenges, and here's why we may not get there.
Right.
But
things are
but they
coming
also
to
need
the
to work
surface
with
now.
people's fears too, and deal with that.
People are saying things out loud in a way that they didn't before, and that's only going to be a good thing. And the number of Democrats who can say, oh, I would love to have a single payer system, but there's just not popular support, or, oh, the Republicans are getting in the way, like that excuse will become thinner and thinner.
I think that's true. All right. Let's go to the big story over the weekend, of course, was Ralph Northam. And I am really, well, I'll give my opinion on the substance of the story. I also think it's sort of interesting that this did not come out until he had these what were considered controversial statements about abortion in Virginia. Now, it's weird to me that this stuff hadn't come out when he ran. It's weird to me that you have a yearbook for medical school where you take pictures. Like, I mean, I get it why people do this in high school.
Have a good summer.
Who's got time for this in college?
And I feel, well, this is not college.
Medical school, dude.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, in college,
it's even more extreme.
Listen, I went to a small school in college, and I'm pretty sure we had a yearbook. And I remember thinking at the time, this is corny. But, it's your college years. But in medical school, it gets pretty corny. And, of course, it turns out that in Ralph's Northam's yearbook in Eastern Virginia Medical School, and my understanding is that that's the old school Virginia, that area. There is a picture on his yearbook page of him sitting by a Camaro or some type of like cruising car. And then, of course, he's got the obligatory hat and outfit. And then, of course, there's also the obligatory picture of a man in blackface and a man in a full-on KKK outfit, presumably going to a party of some sort. I don't know, some type of get-up. Now, Northam has come out, and his defense was that's not me. That picture somehow landed on my yearbook page, and it was somebody else. And he determined this. He first came out and said it was him. Then he said he called around to friends to see if it was him, and People had different stories, but none of them said it was him.
Did he keep a calendar by chance?
He doesn't have a calendar. He does like beer.
Storied shaggy defense.
But here he is. Here is his. This is the. Well, okay. He said, "I know that was not me in the blackface, because I did put on blackface one time to do an impression of Michael Jackson, doing a moonwalk." And here's a guy who, well, you really get the sense that he's a little bit lost in all this. Well, look at this clip.
You said that the competition in San Antonio was a dance competition?
Yes.
And it was that you danced the moonwalk?
That's right.
Are you still able to moonwalk?
Inappropriate circumstances.
My wife says inappropriate circumstances.
Okay, so he looks around to see if there's room for him to do the moonwalk. And his wife just has to go like, "Hey, dude, are you some type of effing idiot?"
Well, now there's an even bigger problem with Ralph Northam. He's a cuck.
Yeah, I mean, that is
totally dominated.
That is pretty. This guy is completely like he doesn't quite get it. Now,
Billie Jean is.
Here is another question they asked him. It turns out that his nickname, at least as written in the yearbook, was Coon Man.
This was written in the yearbook?
Something like that.
Jesus Christ.
Yesterday evening was the first time I saw this photo. It was shocking and it was horrific.
How do you account for one of your nicknames that's listed in the VMI yearbook in 1981, Coon Man? What's your explanation for that?
My main nickname in high school and in college was Goose, because when my voice was changing, I would change an octave. There were two individuals, as best I can recollect, at VMI. They were a year ahead of me that called me Coon Man. I don't know their motives or intent. I know who they are, but that was the extent of that, and it ended up in the yearbook, and I regret that.
Yeah, I bet you do. Now, here's the thing I don't understand. Like, is this the first time he's seen his yearbook?
Yeah. He should have gone on offense. He should have been like, one time I was mocked.
I think like this is the thing that I understand about this, and I think this is important because on the right, there's a whole mechanism for this. That is, I have since come, I found Jesus and forgive me, and this fits into a whole different thing. But on the left, and obviously, I don't think Ralph Northam is, he's not a member of DSA, but on the left, in terms of Democrats, there is no mechanism for this. There is no like, I'm sorry or this and that. And I think the problem here, I don't think the problem is that he wore that stuff 25 years ago. Because I don't think he has a history since then of anything that would in any way implicate those feelings. It's quite possible to me that 25 years ago in Virginia, there was no sensitivity to dressing up that way, right? Like, one guy's got
probably still no sensitivity to that in parts of Virginia today.
Well, that's probably true too. But I'm saying amongst people who would now have more sensitivity to it.
That's
okay.
Right.
And so, and
I have an
but
idealistic
I think the
question.
bottom line is you got to come out and look at this stuff. And if you're going to be a public figure, you've got to own up to it and apologize for it, or at the very least, explain it, contextualize it before it becomes an issue. And then when you come out and deny it, because then it becomes a question of just sort of leadership. And if you want to be a governor of a state, then you're also saying, I want to be a leader. And if you want to be, and this is the case, I think, too, with like, I want to be a famous blah, blah. The fact of the matter is that one of the things that come with fame is that people are going to scrutinize your life and your life decisions. And that's the way it is in this day and age. Just be lucky that you're not, a 14-year-old where every single thing you do is documented in a digital fashion and is going to be there forever. And you're going to have not even anything that isn't going to be something that you're going to have to own up to.
I have
at
a
one
question.
point.
To be
I have
fair-
an idealistic question. Do you think if he was running for governor, and because I was thinking about this, like what? Because I think like, yeah, I think he doesn't have a record of these things. I don't think that every single, mistake or controversy should ruin somebody's career. But it occurred to me like I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is I don't know if this would have sunk it before he began. But if he came out when he was running for governor and was
Definitely.
like, look,
Of course he
by
should
the
have.
way, as a heads up, I did this stupid, disgusting, racist, embarrassing thing in college. And as part of my transparency with you, because I want to lead all of you.
100%. He should have done. If he had done this, if he had done this during his
That's the right
campaign,
move.
or if he had done it at any point, and said, "Look, either apropos of what Ed Henry's doing, running, not Ed Henry, Ed Rollins, Gillespie is running, apropos of these ads." I want to say something. I don't think that you can that just because you had racist beliefs in one time, or you were acculturated in one way growing up in one fashion, that you can't go beyond that. Here's an example. I dressed up in blackface, or I took a picture with somebody who was dressed up in blackface, and it's on my page in the thing, and I took that picture, and at that time I thought, I'm just, it's a goof. Maybe it was a function of not, taking black people, seriously as other individuals, as humans, and I regret that now. And if he had said that, but he's not only is he off the hook in my mind, he's better for it.
Right. Agreed.
To be fair, he first ran for office in 2007, so that was a totally different time.
What do you mean?
Like, just blackface wasn't the same kind of liability that it is now.
Well, I'm saying if he had run for during his governor race.
That was my
That was a
instinct, that if
joke.
he had come out and said, and
Well,
done
look,
that.
I mean, 2007, when was it when Ted Danson wore blackface to a roast for his girlfriend, Whoopi Goldberg?
It's a joke, but a lot of these things have changed a lot in the last 10 years.
It has. I mean, you're being
pretty
facetious.
sure we knew blackface was not okay in 2007.
I don't know when that happened with Ted Danson. And
Billy Crystal did a thing for New Orleans Katrina relief where he just did like a black guy accent for like 30 minutes. It was really weird.
I mean, the
sounds interesting. I want to check that out.
The sensitivity to this stuff and the awareness of it, I think is a lot more recent than you would expect. And
He should have done it. He should have come out, and this should be a model, frankly. And because now to me, it's like, I think he definitely needs to resign because of just how it's underlined a certain sense of disconnect and disrespect, which sort of, I think, inhibits his ability to govern because of how he's responded to it. Even just the thing we played, it's hilarious, but like, oh, I don't know, should I moonwalk? No, you shouldn't. You should not moonwalk during this press conference. You moron.
no, yeah, that's
No, you
just,
should not.
that's just like, that's not racist. That's just dumb.
No, well, no, but that's kind of what I'm saying. I'm not just
obliviousness.
implicating the racism here. I'm implicating the lack
Total
of
awareness, situational awareness.
Right.
Yes,
That's what I'm saying.
I mean, I will say this: in 2000, I did a movie in which one of the characters I had put in blackface, and there was a thematic reason to do it at the time that I don't know that it worked. It was ostensibly to mock the concept of it, and it didn't work. It's not a choice I would make today for something like that. And the movie had other problems as well, and that's why I never officially released it. In the context of people who know my work, broadly speaking, I feel like they can interpret it. But if I was to put it out there publicly, I would be more concerned if that's the first thing that someone saw of my work. There would be too much opportunity, I think, of people misinterpreting it. So I wouldn't publish it in that manner. And I think that Northam could have said, like, look, this is not something I was trying to present to the world, or to the extent that I was to present to the community. People knew me and it contextualized, whatever. If he had offered some explanation of it, or had said, I feel bad about it, I apologize, I didn't know what I knew then, I think he wouldn't be in this type of mess. And I mean, and if it wasn't, like, I find it hard to believe he hadn't looked at his yearbook.
It's also an issue for the people who were supposed to be vetting him when he first got into politics, right?
Yeah, and his opponents.
Like, clearly,
his opponent. Ed Gillespie's like, he's going to go up 5 points with my base if this comes out.
Yeah, if anything, they were afraid of losing supporters to him for that.
Meanwhile,
I'll tell you what, I sure do like the nickname.
So part of the calculation, I think, and in terms of like calling for his, resigning, I mean, to the extent that I would call for his resignation, it would be a function of just like, he's not handling it well.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, can we
That's
also...
what I'm saying. It's about not handling it
I don't think that you necessarily need to resign.
No.
Because there was a picture of you in blackface 25 years ago. I just think that he hasn't come out and dealt with it in a way that gives me any confidence one way or another about that he's either learned something from it, or that I just don't believe
even
the
really
story.
Gets it right now.
Can we also put this in context with the Klan robe, right? Because it's one thing to have like a culturally insensitive Halloween costume where you're trying to dress up like your favorite celebrity and realize you're doing blackface. The Klan robe makes it pretty hard to misinterpret there.
I agree, and I think he needs to explain all of that, and hasn't sufficiently. One of the things I think that has made it easier, and this may sound a little cynical, but I think it's the case. I think it was the case with Franken too, in a similar circumstance, that has made it easier for Democrats to come out and say resign immediately, because also there's another factor here, right? And that is party politics. One factor is social justice, and we're trying to change the culture. And that means that there's necessarily going to be people who pay maybe a disproportionate price than, we might want in a perfect world. That's going to happen with stuff in the Me Too thing and stuff like this. And there are going to be individuals who end up paying a certain percentage more than they probably should. I don't know how you quantify that, but that is nothing compared to the price that has been paid by those people who have been oppressed by these things. And that's the way it works with society. That's just the way it works. And it sucks that we don't have a magic wand and say, we're going to reverse the mistakes of history and no one's going to pay a price. Now, I'm not convinced the price being paid that much, but maybe it's slightly disproportionate. But the thing that made it easier, and then for the question, that's a social justice question, right? Then there is a party politics question. Does it behoove the Democratic Party to have a governor who has not been able to ably deal with this scandal? Okay, putting aside what the scandal is, he has not been able to deal with this. If this is no big deal, he certainly hasn't been able to deal with it in a proper way. He could have been off on the Appalachians with his, his amore, and that would have been a different scandal. But this is the scandal he's in. He's not handling it well. So the calculation is it worth it trying to defend this guy, or do we jettison him? I think a lot of people learned a lot of lessons after Bill Clinton, frankly. I think there's still some of that. But people have been anticipating that the lieutenant governor in Virginia, a guy named Fairfax, I should say, Justin Fairfax, and there was one question about Northam. He did not include Justin Fairfax on his campaign material, and that was a little bit controversial. because Fairfax is a black guy. And there was some controversy about that. Now, that's all I can tell you. I don't know enough of the details to understand, to put that in any other context. However, last night, Justin Fairfax put out a statement like at 3 a.m. I saw this building late night on Twitter, that in responding to a publication by Big League Politics, it's a right-wing website, first posted the photo of Northam's medical school yearbook page, that he was charged with or accused of having assaulted a woman at the 2004 DNC. And he wrote, now she seems, she's a professor. I think she was at the DNC, so I think she was at the time anyways a Democrat. In this statement released early Monday morning, Fairfax office said the Washington Post had already investigated the allegation, chose not to publish a story due to significant red flags and inconsistencies. Fairfax has an outstanding and well-earned reputation for treating people with dignity or respect. Read the statement. He has never assaulted anyone ever in any shape or form. He called the publication false and unsubstantiated against the lieutenant governor. The Post carefully investigated the claim for several months. After being presented with the facts consistent with the governor's denial, Lieutenant Governor, the allegation, the absence of any evidence of corroborating the allegation, and significant red flags and inconsistencies within the allegation, the Post made the considered decision not to publish the story. So what we need now, I think, from the Washington Post is a report on that assessment. Because now that they've been implicated in this story, this is going to be this is going to be the next big question. Because Fairfax could not only assume the Virginia governor's office, but it would not be time that would count towards his term limit. So he could run for re-election and essentially serve almost 2 full terms. So this is a big deal. So keep your eyes on that. Let's go to the phones. We're not getting to nearly as many calls as I had hoped at the beginning of the day. Calling from an 804 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. This is Walker from Richmond.
Walker from Richmond. What's on your mind?
Well, first, just want to talk about the Northam thing. And, yeah, it's pretty crazy how he was in a KKK robe. And I was thinking, like, oh, I thought he was older than he is, but this is in the 80s, and that is pretty crazy to me. Like,
are you there? Hello?
Northam got him. It's a Northam operative.
Yeah, well, first of all, we don't know if he was in blackface or in the KKK robe or in none of it. I mean, we don't know. What I definitely find hard to believe is he didn't know this was on his page in his yearbook, and that's something you might want to put out a statement about. And we don't know, was it a Halloween party? Like, wearing a KKK robe to a Halloween party in and of itself?
Bold.
Well, it's bold in the 1980s, but out of the the blue, I can understand there could be a context to it, but he's not explaining any of it. And so, and like I say, if there was an explanation, and I said this about Kavanaugh too, if Brett Kavanaugh had gone up there and said, I was a blackout drunk, I don't remember doing that, but it doesn't sound like it's impossible I could have done that. And if I did, I regret it. And to the extent that I was aware that this accusation was out there for years, it has haunted me, and I've tried to live my life in a way that made that different. There would have been no story. That would have been the end of it. We have to allow for people to make mistakes when they're younger and learn from it and then lead their lives in a better way. That has to be allowed for. But when they're older and they've shown no signs of learning and they show no signs of accepting the responsibility, that's even more dangerous than if they just had sort of like never addressed it. Because then it shows that, like, I'm willing to lie. I'm willing to hide my agendas. I'm willing to not allow my personal failings to be of benefit to society at all. That's a very dangerous quality in people of substantial power, in my estimation. Sherrod Brown is inching towards making an announcement, I suspect, about running for president. Maybe he won't. Maybe he will. Definitely value for a senator anywhere to be in a position of people asking you questions if you're going to run, because it gets you a little more attention. Nothing like a little bit of earned media. Here is Sherrod Brown, though, not pulling any punches as to Donald Trump. And, you know, this is interesting because Sherrod Brown definitely knows that if he's going on Chuck Todd's show to say this, that Chuck Todd is going to be like, wait, what? It's just that Chuck Todd after Sherrod Brown says this, is a little bit slow. And I don't know that Sherrod Brown had lines that were to go after it. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like if you, there were times in a script.
Have the follow-up plan?
There's times in a script, right, where your lines call for the other person to interrupt you. And so what happens is they stop writing in the script and they just do ellipses, ... Really what should happen is that the thought should be continued and someone should just interrupt. Sherrod Brown had ... It took a moment for you watch this, you'll see what I'm saying.
Folks are now being held accountable for blackface in ways, frankly, that we didn't have that strong of a moral code, I would argue, in our politics until recently. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think this country hasn't dealt well with the issues of race. I mean, we have a president who's a racist, we have.
Let me pause you there. That's just that you believe in his heart he's a racist.
Well, I don't know what in his heart means. I know that he built his political career knowing what he was doing on questioning the legitimacy and the birthplace of the President of the United States. I know early that there have been all kinds of news reports about what he did early in his career on housing. We know, read the new Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, read The Color of Law about housing discrimination and decades and decades and decades of housing discrimination. And we know that the Trump family, including the now sitting president, played to that and deepened that. So these issues, this is not a recess. Charlottesville was only a symptom and a more public viewing and outing, if you will, of the president's views about race. I mean, there's just no question about that. We know the president doesn't tell the truth frequently. Yep. We know he lies frequently. And we know of his racist comments and background.
Yeah, simple. That's super simple. I will also note that we've had both those authors, both those books have been featured in interviews on the Majority Report years ago. You can
listen to Sam Seder.
I've also interviewed Sherrod Brown, for that matter. But good for him.
That was good.
Whether he's running or not, that's super important for folks like Chuck Todd to hear politicians say this and normalize the ability for our politicians to call out a racist for being racist.
That's another hat tip you can give to AOC, actually, of just being the first one to just be like, yeah, obviously.
Of course.
What is there to even prevaricate? But I do love, and that was...
How can you say that?
That was very MR, the I don't know what in his heart means.
Right.
It's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, okay, maybe he visualizes ponies for everybody, but I'm talking about what he does as president of the United States and as a slumlord. Also, someone pointed out, I think it might be giving him a little too much credit, but it was clever enough to note, yeah, he does. Sherrod Brown does have a little bit of a Caucasian lula voice. Touch of a Caucasian
there you
lula.
Go. This is pretty funny. You'll all remember Turning Points USA Well, they have moved across the Atlantic, but apparently the TP UK folks don't have quite the media savvy that they need to launch. They launched last night or yesterday, and I still can't follow it. There is TP UK Manchester is the name of the group, and they launch, but it is unclear. There is another group called Turning Point Manchester at Turning Point MCR versus TP UK Manchester at TP UK _MCR. In other words, this is that situation, like, I don't know if you saw it on the original Star Trek, where there was like a clone of Captain Kirk, and he was fighting, and he's like going, "That's not the real James Kirk." And the other guy goes, "I am the real James Kirk. That's not the real James Kirk." Well, this went on.
You have to figure out which one to shoot.
You don't know which one to shoot. And so Turning Point Manchester at Turning Point MCR says, "This is not Manchester TP UK. This is an anti-white Antifa scum who want to destroy our movement, report and block," talking about the TP UK _MCR tweet. But then the TP UK MCR handle wrote, "This is not Manchester TP UK. This is an anti-white Antifa scum who want to destroy our movement, report and block." And then the original group goes, "Stop it, for F's sake. Jack, Twitter, please ban this impersonator." And then the other one.
I think the one with the underscore is on our side, right?
I don't know. He comes back. "Sorry, libtard. You can't deplatform us. The free market has spoken. You're a fake Antifa account trying to confuse our dedicated and motivated conservative youth audience. Owned." But the amazing thing is, and then it goes on, "The Antifa left is currently hate mobbing TP accounts, trying unsuccessfully to ruin our successful launch. They will not succeed. TP UK is here to stay." And then they respond to...
I think these are all trolls except for that one. So the jokes about the size of people's faces are not funny and could be considered a hate crime. Charlie Kirk is 100 times the activist of any of you cultural...
Marxists will be. But go back to the first one, because this is sort of stunning. Like, because at first I thought TP UK _MCR was the fake one. However, the supposed real one is writing, "This is anti-white Antifa scum who want to destroy our movement, report and block." Also sounds like a parody account.
It does.
I mean, the fact that it's so hard for us to tell doesn't speak well of the real one.
No.
Does not.
So tough launch for TP UK or Turning Point UK.
And we're
not sure which is which.
I'm the real one.
We can thank, I think, a few people, but Vic Berger, I think, is part of the whole photoshopping Charlie Kirk's head to be larger than it is by just slightly.
You really got to talk to him about his hate crimes.
Oh my God, we should definitely call him out for that. That's so mean. That's so mean. Calling from a 619 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 619.
I just had a quick.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. I just had a quick question about your opinions on how the.
I'm sorry. Your name and where are you calling from?
Delegation.
Wait, your name.
Oh,
good.
It's Ricky Soto from San Diego, California. But I had a question about the new congressional delegation and what you guys thought about their responses to different foreign policy, points of conversation. Yesterday, I saw that, AOC talked to Jeremy Corbyn, but like after there was, some people on Twitter saying like, "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn's an anti-Semite. We need to talk about this. Like, this isn't okay." And her comms team like responded to Rabbi Shmuley and a bunch of others about having that dialogue. And I was wondering if you think they're being to both sidesy, or if you guys think this is just in plain politics, trying to get the message out there.
I think we talked about this a little bit before the show. My personal feeling is, you go, you say, we will hear what you're saying, because you have to take, broadly speaking, you have to take people who are broadly to be considered mainstream. You have to take their accusations seriously enough to listen. And so I think, where they go with that after that will determine, my assessment of what they're doing. But let me put it this way. It is, and so some of what I'm saying is conjecture, right? But it is much smarter, it seems to me, and much more irresponsible, and a much much better model to for them to say, oh, okay, we'll sit down with you and we'll hear your specific complaints and accusations, and you can show us evidence of what you're talking about. And then if that evidence is lacking, which I think my guess is it's going to be, they walk out of that meeting and they go, we just sat down, we just took time out of our schedule, we just met with the people, we paid the proper respects to individuals who have a right to raise these issues, and we found that there's no evidence to substantiate their claims whatsoever. That, to me, is a far more successful process than being on Twitter and going, we're not going to listen to any of that.
I just want to, I'm 90% with you. The only things that I'm a little concerned about is I do think there's some people, and Shmuley Boteach would be a person that actually you don't respond to. You just don't give, because that really is somebody who's in the absolute gutter. So I'm not saying anybody who would say that.
But he was Michael Jackson's personal spiritual advisor.
I told Michael Jackson how to have a healthy sex life. Oops, I shouldn't have said that. And then the other thing, kosher sex, look it up. And then the other thing I would say too is like, there. Ultimately, though, it's a substantive conflict because they're not going. It's that the answer to that meaning is going to be determined by them coming out with a clear answer on Israel-Palestine, which they don't have yet. Because it's like you can go and say, look, we all know Jeremy Corbyn has said. I think the analogy I used was like he said it, although a bit worse. But you could draw an analogy with like some things Bernie said several years ago, which were definitely not bigoted, but you could say, oh, that's a little tone deaf, right? So that's definitely some of the things he said about Jewish people in the UK. But an actual charge of actual anti-Semitism is baseless, and the only way you can get there is if you transfer it into you're a critic of Israel. So ultimately, and she's not wanted to, and I've been pretty easy on her with this one, but when she was running and she was more of a DSA candidate, she was pretty unequivocal about what was happening in Israel-Palestine, and then she's kind of begged off of that a bit. So to me, it's like that meeting is going to be ultimately Jeremy Corbyn is an anti-Semite because he wants democracy in Israel-Palestine. What's your position? So, that to me is it's going to be more complicated than just wacky people saying this or that, which, by the way, again, Shmuley Boteach really is. So the other people, I think you're right. I agree with you, Sam, that take the meeting, clear the air. But Shmuley Boteach is like, she shouldn't be responding to the random marketing or Ben Shapiro or
whatever. Of course.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the phone call. But, the bottom line is this, is that where we are on Israel and Palestine is further away from where we want to be than on most issues. And I think a lot of politicians whom we may like make the assessment that I can expend X percentage of my political strength on this one issue, which I will not be able to really have any influence on short term or midterm, or I can sort of like hang back, not necessarily say the wrong things, but not necessarily press the right things.
So agreed,
and
but here's
expend that political cash. That's
but it's
I'm making an
complicated
assessment
by the fact that she won her race. Like her switching of rhetoric was after she won, so she won a race. No, but I'm talking just the most, but the most basic calculation you're talking about is electoral.
No, I'm not making an electoral. Then
why
that's
else
not just
would you not?
Well, because you need to build
really quick. The other follow-up
because you need to build a
Ilhan
legislative.
Omar and Rashida Tlaib and the coalition that she's a part of have already staked out much further ground on that. So she doesn't need to make it her primary issue, but she absolutely.
I'm talking as a general principle. As a general principle, you could apply this to Bernie too.
Well, let me just finish. Gone further in her. The difference with him is, I think expect
legislatively, if you want to get things done in certain ways, there are constituents, there are colleagues who are working who might be harder to work with them because of big donors and whatnot. It's just they're not there. The party, broadly speaking, is moving in the right direction, particularly from where it was like 6 years ago, I think. But this is something that people are going to have to be aware of, that this is a calculation that a politician makes, not just from an electoral perspective. I would imagine if you were to poll the people who voted for her in the primary and say, how many of you are voting as a first issue Israeli-Palestinian rights?
Literally none.
And versus, Medicare for all, right?
Literally none.
And so that's
base is. I'm just saying. I think it is actually useful to parse. I think when people get pissed off for Bernie for not endorsing BDS, that is an unrealistic misread of the political environment. Even though, of course, I disagree. I support BDS, but that is quite different than saying there is a crop of people of which you're a part of, which at the very least is unequivocal about mass murder in Gaza and isn't going to take concern trolling about Jeremy Corbyn. So I think that's just, again, it's also just where her base is. Ultimately, you also have to be with your base.
I also just don't think there's a huge amount of people out there who want her to expend her political capital on protecting Jeremy Corbyn on Twitter.
I don't know about that.
It also points to some of the
misread
issues
of
with standpoint epistemology, right? When a Jewish organization says it's anti-Semitic to criticize Israel and do the things that Jeremy Corbyn has done, it just is. We're Jewish. You have to take our word for it. You have to be able to evaluate within a rational and objective framework whether or not you think that's true. Definitely. And that's something that's going to be used against the left over and over again in a variety of contexts that we need to be ready for.
And the best way to fight back on that, it seems to me, is to essentially make it clear that you are assessing the charges based upon not the identities of those who are bringing them, but rather on the facts themselves.
Right,
and
because Jews are not a monolith, like no minority is.
Right, but, to sit down with them, I think, is just the smartest thing to do.
Yeah.
Regardless of, I don't know if people are as savvy about
just so long as Shmuley isn't there.
But yes.
I think it's important he's not there.
I have a feeling he'll get into any possible room he can if she's showing up.
Oh,
but I guarantee you, if she comes back and says, I met with these people, I looked at the issue, I do not believe that Corbyn is an anti-Semite, the ADL is not going to be happy with that.
But she's not doing it for the ADL at that point. What she's doing is for everybody in between the ADL and everywhere else. She's doing it to show that, look, I'm not rejecting the ADL. I'm going in and I sat down and I listened to the facts, and I encourage other people to do that. That appeals to everybody who wants just someone to react rationally on the facts. So she's never going to convince the ADL. She's never going to convince Shmuley Botek. She's trying to convince everyone else from them to the left of center that she is taking a clear-eyed view of this and is not being knee-jerk.
No, I agree. I agree with that part of it. I just think she needs to be ready for what's going to happen at the end of that process.
Well, if she's not, then she lacks a certain savvy, which I would
she
find
doesn't lack because I love her.
Calling from a 347 area code.
Hello?
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 Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can now.
Who are you and where are you calling from?
My name is Blakely. I'm calling from New York City.
Hello, Blakely. What's on your mind?
I had a question about you guys talking about like the plans of or the coalition of the left. And my question was, why is it that the left is so fragmented when the right is so cohesive in the way that they stick together? I still don't understand that, and I thought you guys would probably know.
I mean, it's the shorthand for that question is that the right is incredibly homogenous. They are the true party of identity. There is one identity that makes up 90 to 95% of its voters, white people. They are less diverse socially, economically, probably geographically, and they, to the extent that they have political power, it is in places that also see less people that are different than them. And so just the natural design of these philosophies are reflected in that there's just much more diversity of thought and agendas on the left than there would be on the right. I mean, it makes total sense. Like almost definitionally, right? Like the bottom line for conservatives is to maintain a very narrow status quo, to keep keep money and culture as static in control of very few hands, or very homogenous hands. And it's just not the case on the left. And so that's why.
Oh, I'd also like to add there's a class element there, because the right, which I'll define broadly as like Republicans in this country, is unified on a class basis, right? It's the boss class. It's small business owners, which really make up the base of Trump's support, even if they might talk in a more populist way. Most of them are not poor. Whereas the Democratic Party is a cross-class alliance. It's not a labor party. It contains bosses and workers. So they have to kind of walk the line of representing the interests of two different groups that are often diametrically opposed.
Right, and it seems to be particularly like that, I feel like, in New York. Like, I recently, only in the last few years, started getting involved with politics. And I started trying to get involved in like the local community. And after a little bit, I was like, man, this is a fucking shit show. Like, it's really overwhelming how many different factions there are and how disjointed it is. And I don't even know where to start. Like, I want to get involved. I would like to run for office. But like after I went to a bunch of events and started getting involved in some of the groups, I was like, oh my gosh, this is worse than I thought.
Well, yeah, it ain't easy.
Yeah.
If it was easy,
and,
listen, here's the bottom line. You know, the fact is that the left's policies, broadly speaking, are far more popular than the right's. So, you know, that's one of the reasons, but there are a lot of competing interests, and as to which policies get addressed first and how, and that's why, you know, we are where we are. But I appreciate the phone call. I would hang in there. Let's go to calling from a 702 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? We just got time for like 2 more calls, I think. Who's this? 702.
Hey, Sam. It's Bro Flamingo from Las Vegas.
Bro Flamingo from Las Vegas. What's on your mind?
2 things. I'll try to be quick. Number 1, again, I'm black. Kamala Harris. She's a cop. She's a prosecutor. She built a career on incarcerating black people. I'm sure everybody saw the clip of her laughing about truancy and stuff. She's not the one. All her support is astroturfed. Second thing, too, is what I found really offensive about Kamala Harris is that she put out the videos of her dancing to Cardi B, if you can call it dancing. I don't know what it was. Wow. And the second thing is, oh, yeah, I like Converse or whatever. Nothing about black issues, but you could talk about Converse, Wakanda, and Cardi B. Just really, really offensive. But it doesn't surprise me because her communications director, I guess a woman named Lily Adams, doesn't look anything like a black person. Saying it like that, and you know, she's not the one. She's really just not the one. I can say I haven't met a black person who's like. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
All right. Well, I mean, aside from, I mean, I think her functions as a cop are more concerning to me than her being a cop. But putting that aside, it seems to me the dynamic is with people of color running, at least nationally, is that we're still in an age where a black person has to run almost against their being black. Like that the data suggests that Hillary Clinton was more racialized in her campaign, or at least had far, far more racial rhetoric than Obama did. And I suspect that Kamala Harris and Cory Booker, two candidates who I'm not particularly thrilled with, regardless, are going to their agenda in terms of talking about race is to basically not talk about race, avoid it, and to the extent that they do talk about it, they're going to talk about individual responsibility. They're going to do stuff like Obama's My Brother's Keeper programs, right? Ones that are full of respectability, politics, and whatnot. There's a real dilemma because, however, there is because of the natural tendency for people to assume that people who look like me or are similarly situated as me might have my interests in mind.
Yeah, it's a con job. It's a con job. Because look, you're dancing to Cardi B. What does that have to do with anything? Oh, you like Converse? Very nice. Thanks for patting me on the head and calling me a rude. It has nothing to do with anything. I'm supporting your point, but it's just like it's 2019 now. I think we saw what Hillary Clinton did. We all played that game. We all played that game, and nothing happened. I mean, of course, look, there's a lot of dynamics. I'm really oversimplifying it.
Right.
But you get what I'm saying. I mean,
well, let me put it this way. It's 2019, but it's not 2026. You know what I mean? Like in 2026, if we had this conversation, we'd be like, seriously? But it's 2019. And, we've just come out of, our politics have become as racialized as they have been probably in about 40 years, based on the data that Barack Obama taught 50% of whites without a college education that the Democrats were actually to the left of Republicans on race, right? That is an amazing statistic, and I think it's still being digested in some ways through our body politic. What else you got? Got to be quick.
And one more thing.
Yeah.
And one more thing, Sam. In terms of your commentary about the Ralph Northam thing, I got to push back because you said he should resign on the way he's handling it instead of the actual content of what happened. Am I correct when I say that?
Well, let me say this. The way he's handling it leads me to believe that the content may mean more than it could. Right? I mean,
but let me say that.
Go ahead.
I just want to say this, Sam, because we kind of have to push back because you look at, say, Florida with Andrew Gillum, you look at Stacey Abrams in Georgia, we have black people here almost handing us these states which were out of reach just even 4 years ago. And, this guy should resign. I mean, look, let's be clear now. Again, I say, to your point, Sam, it's not 2026, it's 2019, but still, we're seeing, black people, and of course other people too, but we're becoming the backbone of the party here. And for this guy to be posing in blackface, there's no more excuses. It's time to be like, look.
But let me ask you this: if he had come out,
hold on, wait.
Yeah.
They're trying to be taking a hard line against these racist idiots and thugs. Because it's about time. It's like, look, okay, no more lip service. Just get him out of here. And also, to your point, though, Sam, I agree with you on some of where it's like he looked like a freaking incompetent. He looks like an incompetent.
All right, well, but staying on your point, if he had come out a month ago and said, look, I have become aware that there is a picture of me in blackface and in the KKK outfit, whichever, right? And in my my high school or my college yearbook, I want to take this time to A, apologize, to B, say that at the time I didn't realize the implications of what I was doing. I know I should have, but I grew up, surrounded by people who were very casual and using, the N-word, and the idea of blackface was just funny to them, and I just didn't know any better. And I grew up in this, area of Virginia. I went to school in that area of Virginia, and it wasn't until later when I got, outside, I realized the implications of this. So I want to just basically, apropos of nothing other than to clear the air for myself, to say this was wrong. I mean, should he resign in that instance?
Yeah, listen, all across the Sam, to use your metaphor, it's not 2016 anymore. I can understand in 2016 this could be flying, but at the end of the day, the ground has shifted so much, especially in the era
I understand,
Trump.
but do you think that the guy it's an easy question. Do you think, and because you've said the guy should resign now, if he had come out and done that, even before this was a controversy, do you think he should resign at that point?
Yes, because I'll say he should resign. Because also another thing too, and the thing that you pointed out was when he was hiding his lieutenant governor's color, and not putting him on there's something here, okay? I mean, there's a there. This guy has some racist sentiment. Again, this could fly back in, the Clintonian third-way garbage that we've been enduring for so long. But again, we're seeing now, look, a lot of people don't want to tolerate this garbage anymore. I mean, just screw it. Just get him out of here. I mean, and there's so many people who are better than this guy. This guy is garbage.
Well,
garbage.
I agree. But he was. Garbage. I mean, look. But he was elected by the people of Virginia, and so I think there is, some duty to assess, but nevertheless, that's a hypothetical. He didn't do that, and I think that's why he should go. But
here's another question.
I appreciate the phone call
about Northam. Has he been fighting for the rights of marginalized people in substantial ways since then?
He just expanded Medicaid to 180,000 people. I would imagine
first thing he did,
significant percentage of people of color. Certainly,
anybody who needs Medicaid is
leading. Are marginalized insofar. I mean, that is a big deal. And I think he also did something in terms of criminal justice reform too, right? Didn't he? Or was that? Am I confusing McAuliffe?
Actually.
Oh, he voted for it. I mean, so yeah, he does have. I think he's not Bernie Sanders, but he does have a record. I think of that one could expect that is a fairly decent record for a Democrat in Virginia. I mean, maybe even past that.
Because if you do want to come back from something like that, you better have been fighting for the rights of oppressed people, specifically black people, pretty hard for a pretty long time. Otherwise, you don't have a leg to stand on at all.
I think. I mean, I don't know what the line is for that, but yes, he expanded Medicaid, which was within the mechanisms he has as governor. There's really nothing else he could do unilaterally as governor that could have more impact than that for folks situated in that. All right, we only have time for one more call. We have a lot of people hanging on. I apologize, folks. Calling from a 267 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Sam. Can you hear me?
Yeah. I just took the first call out of the range of people who've been on the phone for well over an hour. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
My name is Connor. I'm calling from Bucks County, Pennsylvania.
Connor from Bucks County. What's going on?
I just wanted to call. First of all, I wanted to say that I just am finishing my first Ursula Le Guin book, all thanks to Jamie.
Oh, hell yeah.
But, and then I just picked up the Malcolm X autobiography as well. But I wanted to ask you, what do you think? So I live in the same county as Mindy, so I'm actually running either for township supervisor or for township auditor in the next coming election.
Sweet.
In 2019. But I'm only 23, so a lot of the worry within my local Democratic group is about how old I am and how I lack experience.
Right.
So what would you think that the best rebuttal would be for that? I mean, I'm pretty well educated, and I have I'm a real estate agent. I am studying for my CPA. I have a lot of different things going for me, but I mean, even if you apply it to a greater, how do you think that Democrats that are younger approach that question?
I think broadly speaking, okay, that if you think that you have a liability for anything, and you think other people think that you have that liability, you start by addressing that. So in any speech or any conversation you have where you're trying to pitch people, is you say, I know I'm young, and I know a lot of people think I'm too young to do this. And I'll tell you why I don't think, why I don't think the rational concerns that people have about someone my age are applicable, or at least I would say I still, at the end of the day, to the extent that my lack of experience is a liability, A, I feel like I can turn it into a strength, and B, I feel like I am a quick learner, and I have established myself in the community, both, professionally and in terms of, the community in this way and that way. And I am willing to listen to people. My age is not going to be an obstacle in terms of listening to what people have to say. And I appreciate that there are people who have more experience than me, and I'm going to be looking to them for advice and for consult. But I have an energy and I have a responsibility, and I like to think it might be somewhat beyond my age. But so the key is acknowledge people's concerns, break it down as to why they have those concerns, and explain to them why you have other attributes that will fill in for anything that you lack as a function of age.
All right, that's awesome. Yeah, I have a meeting tonight, so I have to decide within the next couple weeks.
Yeah, I would look, you sound like a smart person. You sound like you have lined up, stuff, and then once you address the concerns that people have, and you acknowledge them as being rational. Once you do that, you put yourself in what they call the circle of trust, right? Because if somebody else thinks that something's a problem and you acknowledge that it's a problem, but once you do that, you're on the same page as them. And then you are able to provide a solution, right? Or things that are going to mitigate that problem. But you need to meet people where they are in terms of what they perceive as a problem. And, it's also an improv lesson, right? No denial. Yes, and basically is what you're going to say. And I would also tweet at Mindy, because I suspect she might be an asset.
And you'll have ideas.
Oh yeah, she already follows me on there, and I've talked to her briefly about it, but that was before I really was considering a run. But the current township board is made up of two Republicans and one Democrat, but the two Republicans are actually retiring, so we could run two Democrats and really totally flip Doylestown.
That would be great.
It'd be a totally different ball game for us here.
Right. Well, it sounds like you bring a lot of energy to it. Good luck, man. Appreciate the call.
Thank you.
Keep us updated.
I appreciate it.
Keep us updated. All right, folks. That's all the time we have for today's program.
Goodbye.
See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in. guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. The months drifted into years while I shifted in and out of gear, waiting for my moment to happen. I don't know how much longer I can stay in, or how much more I got to pay to play in. I know somehow